What a field day for the heat down there. 1,000 people in the street singing songs and they carry inside. Mostly saying hooray for our side. There's battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody wrong. When people speak in their mind, getting so much resistance from behind. We got to stop the children, what's that sound? Everybody look, it's going down.
Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner. Welcome to tonight's edition of The Robust Opposition. I've got a really good show tonight on our new governor, Gavin Newsom. And the title of this show is Newsom Worse Than Big Oil Brown. And I say this because of some things that have been coming out in the news recently. A report by Consumer Watchdog and Frack Tracker has shown that fracking has increased 103% under Gavin Newsom, and that recently he appointed someone onto the AQMD who just came from Exxon Corporation, the very corporation that these regulatory agencies are supposed to be regulating. First, I'm going to introduce my guest, who is Dan Bacher. Dan is the longtime editor of the Fish Sniffer magazine, published by Northern California Angler Publications. His articles on fisheries, water, regulatory capture, and environmental justice have been published in an array of publications, including the East Bay Express, Appeal Democrat, Sacramento News and Review, Sacramento Bee, Native California News, Elk Grove News.net, Yuba.net, Counterpunch, and others. He also writes a weekly column for the Stockton Record. He serves on the advisory board of Save the American Association and is a board member of waterforfish.org. He was inducted into the California Outdoors Hall of Fame in January of 2015. And you also left out that you write for the Daily Coast, which is where I most often read your articles, and including the two articles that you're going to be talking about tonight.
Right.
Adam Scow is a senior consumer advocate for Consumer Watchdog, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing an effective voice for taxpayers and consumers in an era when special interests dominate public discourse, government, and politics. A seasoned campaign director and public advocate, Adam specializes in privacy, technology, and environmental issues. Adam was previously the California Director of Food and Water Watch, which is where I met him, where he oversaw successful local and legislative campaigns to promote clean energy and protect California's water as a public resource. In 2016, Adam helped pass Measure Z, making Monterey County the first major oil-producing county in the nation to ban fracking, despite record spending by the oil industry. Adam has been a regular contributor to major media publications as an often cited expert and op-ed author. Outside of politics, Adam enjoys music and sports. He has won 3 Ultimate Frisbee National Championships and is an avid fan and organizer of chamber music performances, one of which I actually attended last week. It was awesome. Why don't you tell us what Consumer Watchdog and Frack Tracker found out about Gavin Newsom?
Sure. We released a report last week that had 2 main findings. The first finding was that 8 regulators at the Division of Oil and Gas and Geothermal Resources, also known as DOGGR, 8 of these regulators who are supposed to oversee the oil and gas industry, enforce the law, check their permits, 8 of them disclosed personal investments in the oil and gas industry, including the deputy director, who disclosed that he had up to $100,000 in Exxon. Now, Exxon is a parent of Era Energy, one of the biggest oil players in California. Several other employees disclosed having holdings in Chevron, Shell, BP, Valero. So we, in our opinion, that's ethically and morally wrong. And in addition, we think there could be a legal conflict of interest violation. So we also filed a complaint with the Fair Political Practices Commission, known as the FPPC, and we're awaiting word from them on whether they will investigate. So we dropped that last week. We also, in partnership with Frack Tracker, dropped information that the Division of Oil and Gas has approved over 2,300 permits for new oil wells and reworking oil wells, and on top of that, about 200 frack job permits. All this at a faster rate than in 2018.
Now, Adam, you and I I've been fighting fracking since 2012. I don't know when you started with Food and Water Watch, but one of the things that I became very aware of when I was fighting Fran Pavley's very weak fracking regulatory bill, which I put in air quotes because it didn't really regulate fracking, was that the Department of Conservation, the state agency, which oversees DOGGR, the Division of Oil and Gas and Geothermal Resources, has two missions that are almost contradictory. One is to exploit the resource and to regulate it. So right then and there, I mean, don't you think that they should have two separate divisions? Because those two missions are in almost complete contradiction to one another.
Well, I would say that their mission leans heavily in favor of supporting the oil lobby. They were really created to help be an umpire between the oil companies and managing their affairs with the state. In terms of enforcing environmental laws, in my view, that's really more the job of the Water Board and the Air Board, and they are not doing enough to oversee this agency. Now, so this agency is very cozy. They always have been. 10 years ago, an oil worker died, was scalded to death in an oil field in Kern County. Then Governor Schwarzenegger actually directed the regulators to do a harder job looking at the permits before enforcing them, before allowing them to happen. Once Governor Brown came into office, the oil industry was complaining, and he fired Derek Chernow and Elena Miller and replaced them with industry-friendly people. So this agency is very tight with the oil industry. They always have been. And I think your question raises a larger question: is there actually a clean way to do oil extraction and gas extraction? In my view, there is not. Right.
Now, tell us the action that Newsom took after he found out about this. What did he do the very next day?
He fired the DOGGR supervisor, Ken Harris, who was a Brown appointee. He then named Jason Marshall to be the acting director. Now, Jason Marshall is deputy director of the Department of Conservation, the larger state agency that oversees DOGGR. Jason Marshall, in our view, is also very industry friendly, however, has been an abettor at DOGGR. And so we don't think that he is the answer. He's the right person for that job. And in our letter to Gavin Newsom, to Governor Newsom, we encouraged him to clean house at DOGGR, get rid of all the Brown appointees, and replace them with people who are going to be tough regulators.
This guy, Jason, just took an action. I read about this today, but apparently it was reported by KQED on July 13th. There was this oil release in Kern County at a Chevron plant, and 800,000 gallons of oil were spilled into a dry riverbed. And apparently what this report showed is that they made very minor requirements of Chevron to clean it up. And when this new guy came in, he asked them to do more. So I think right there, it shows that your reporting and the change in personnel may have had effect. Do you have any comment on that?
We're doing some digging into this because there's a lot of different nasty oil extraction techniques. Fracking is the most famous. Cyclic steam is very similar to fracking. Boils water with chemicals in order to move the oil. And I understand that was what was going on at this oil field. And cyclic steaming is actually more commonly used in California than hydraulic fracturing. And that cyclic steaming was actually exempted from Fran Pavley's SB4. It is not subject to those regulations, and that was an industry victory. So DOGGR's oversight there has been very lax. My understanding is that when Brown fired Chernow and Miller, they were trying to do more on that front, and hopefully we're going to bring some more to light there. But this is a massive oil spill. But this is typical. When you have a dirty industry such as oil drilling and gas drilling, there's going to be accidents. That's not the exception, it's the norm.
Right. Now, Dan, you also wrote about how Newsom has appointed a guy from formerly from Exxon to be in the AQMD. And when we were talking about that, you said at least Brown had, he appointed bureaucrats. Newsom's actually appointing people straight out of the industry, which put me in mind of Donald Trump. Can you talk more about that appointment and any others that you know about?
Yes. On Friday, appointed Nikki Newsom of Los Angeles to the South Coast Air Quality Management District Board. And she was the environmental project manager and process engineer at ExxonMobil Corporation from 1997 to 2011. She also held several positions at Northrop Grumman from 2004 to 2014. There's lots of people that are qualified, people who have environmental backgrounds, that live in that area, the South Coast. And of all the people that he would hire somebody from industry just after he's fired the head of Dogger. Now, this is part of an overall problem that I've been noticing since he became governor. And I was hoping that he would actually do better than Jerry Brown. But right from the beginning, he started appointing people that come from industry or from nonprofit corporations that are kind of what I describe often as money laundering for big corporations. And the first two people that he appointed of significance environmentally was Jared Blumenfeld for the head of the Cal EPA. And this is probably Newsom's best appointment. People at the Cal EPA like him. He meets with people. He seems to be more progressive than any of the other people. Then for the Secretary of Resources, he appointed somebody, Wade Crowfoot, that the previous job he had was for the Water Foundation, which was started by the Resources Legacy Foundation. And so what you have is big nonprofits that give big grants to push projects. They've funded studies for the Delta tunnels, and they also provided virtually all the funding for the Marine Life Protection Act initiative. You have people that are coming, rather from government that have experience in that, they're actually working for corporations. Now, they may be nonprofit, but nonetheless, it's still private sector. You have this constant back and forth, revolving door between the private sector and government. In February, Newsom refused to appoint or reappoint Brown's best appointee, Felicia Marcus, as the chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. And he recently, on June 28th, reappointed a couple of the least popular, most environmentally questionable appointees, and that would be Chuck Bonham, who's the CDFW, the California Department of Fish and Game Director, and Carla Nemeth, who's the Department of Water Resources Director. So, I personally have been very unhappy about this. He also created a new position just for agriculture, something that Jerry Brown had never done. And that's a guy named Michael Lyons, who's a San Joaquin Valley grower. So you have within the governor's office a cabinet member that came straight from Big Ag and represents Big Ag. And this is kind of unprecedented, in my opinion, and not a good move, especially since he was the very same one, and the people behind him, Big Ag, the Resnicks and Westlands, were the people that were pushing that Felicia Marcus be removed from the State Water Resources Control Board. So this is what I call deep regulatory capture.
He's been disappointing on a lot of fronts. I mean, the education people are very unhappy with his charter school commission that had mostly charter school shills in it. And he recently watered down a very important charter school reform bill before it got to the education committee with amendments. And then, of course, over July 4th weekend, he railroaded through this bill to bail out PG&E. And a lot of people are saying this could be as bad as the Enron debacle. Adam, do you want to discuss that a little bit?
You know, I'll say on the positive side, getting wildfire victims paid is important. And so we agree with the intent of that. There are some devils in the details, however. It's going to be harder for cities to municipalize their energy system away from PG&E. I know San Francisco, San Jose, and Oakland are considering doing that. And there are some provisions in there that empower the PUC, again, another state agency that has been very cozy with PG&E, Edison, and SoCalGas. It will give them some more power in deciding that. Also, it gives the PUC more authority to issue revenue bonds, which means raising rates for ratepayers after the wildfire fund is exhausted. So, in our opinion, it could lead to a bailout depending on the PUC's behavior. There's some dangerous provisions in there that could lead to that.
Western States Petroleum Association is the trade association for the oil industry in the western states of Nevada, Washington, Arizona, California, and Oregon. And it's the most powerful lobbying organization in the state. Just to give you an example of how powerful they are, during the 2015 to 2016 legislative session, they spent, the oil industry spent a historic $36.1 million to lobby lawmakers and officials in California. And they were the top spender, WISPA was, and then the oil industry was the top spender of all, of all the groups combined, when you combine Chevron and the other groups. In recent years, in the past year, they've continued this whole trend, and that WISPA spent just about $16 million in the 2017-2018 session, and they were only trumped in 2018 by PG&E, which spent during that specific year nearly $10 million.
And maybe, Adam, you can talk about how they pretty much wrote the cap and trade bill, AB 398, that we did a show about last year, and talk about why that was bad, why Food and Water Watch and indigenous groups don't like market-based mechanisms like cap and trade and even a carbon tax.
Sure. Well, the simple overview of why many groups are becoming increasingly skeptical and oppose cap and trade and a carbon tax is that because it often means it's just pay to pollute. And what we really need to do in this climate crisis, is, as it gets worse every day, is get off of fossil fuels entirely. Now, the basic simple way of looking at it is, well, you say a carbon tax, if you make it high enough, then it will be more expensive than renewable energy, and therefore there will be a natural transition. It makes it easier. But reality is more complicated than that. The energy companies have monopolies. There's all sorts of political controls. And so really what we really need is a government mandate to get to 100% renewable energy in the next 15 years to avoid the worst of climate change. Now, a little bit about that bill, AB 398. I can't remember if that was 1 or 2 years ago. I think it was 2 years. But
wow, time flies.
We're getting old, huh? Yeah, they helped write that bill. And one of the worst things that it did is that it removed the local air boards had some power to regulate refineries here in the Bay Area. The Bay Area Air Quality Management District was trying to regulate the local refineries here more stringently and cap their emissions. And in that bill, they lost their power to do so. So that's a bad thing.
One of the second ways that WESPA influences is through campaign spending, out and out contributions to candidates. How much would you say that they've spent in direct contributions? Who are they contributing to? And who is in that caucus that they call the Ma Dems or the Oily Dems that basically do their bidding for them in Sacramento?
The oil and gas industry paid $182 million to California politicians, PACs, and political causes between 2001 and June 30th of 2018. The top recipients of this were Arnold Schwarzenegger, $169,000. Number two, Jerry Brown, $160,000. Gray Davis, $151,900. Kathleen Galgiani, Assemblyman, $106,899. And finally, Margaret Whitman, that was $104,550. And they also, in that report, revealed that contributions from oil companies to individual politicians totaled nearly $9 million from 2001 to 2017. Assemblymember Jim Frazier, who's been good on other issues like the Delta tunnels, but isn't very good on oil and gas issues, he got $87,000. Assemblymember Catherine Bacher got $83,000. Senator Tony Actams got $61,000. Assemblymember Tim Grayson got $52,100, and Senator Stephen Glazier got $42,350. So this is substantial money that's gone into these politicians' campaigns from big oil. These are members of the Western States Petroleum Association. Usually, you don't see WISPA contribute directly. It's their members that contribute to the politicians. WISPA spends most of its money lobbying and supporting AstroTurf groups that it forms.
Adam, talk about the other Consumer Watchdog report, Brown's Dirty Hands, in which you talked about how they funneled money through the California Democratic Party.
Right, and that was in addition to Governor Brown, who took over $2 million from the oil industry. That does not include the utilities, by the way. And then I'm not remembering the exact amount of how much he funneled through the Democratic Party. I want to say $400,000 to $800,000. At his climate conference in San Francisco last September, which was protested very heavily and successfully, Brown was put on the spot by the media about these contributions. And he pretty much just admitted that money feeds politics, and that's just how it is. So it was almost, he revealed his own capture.
The Democratic Party decided to stop doing that, but now I understand that they're funneling the money through the county committees. And when I questioned somebody I know who is a progressive in the California Democratic Party, they didn't seem that concerned about it, because they basically said, how is the party supposed to make money? I mean, basically, the party has activities to fund. Obviously, my answer would be to go to ordinary Democrats in the same way that ordinary citizens fund Bernie Sanders. He doesn't take corporate money or PAC money. If the Democratic Party were representing Democrats, then they could get funding from them. But I don't think they can get funding from them right now, because we see that in California, the Democrats are acting just like Republicans. Dan, let's shift over to what you call the AstroTurf groups. First of all, for those people who don't understand what that term means, what is an AstroTurf? And talk about some of the ones that the Western States Petroleum Association has formed and what they're designed to do.
Okay, an AstroTurf group is a group that's most often used by corporate interests that makes the sponsors of a message or organization make it appear as though it comes from grassroots participants. 16 different AstroTurf groups that they had up on a chart. They include the California Drivers Alliance, Fed Up at the Pump, Californians Against Higher Taxes, Save Our Jobs, Washington Consumers for Sound Fuel Policy, AB 32 Implementation Group, Tank the Tax, Oregonians for Sound Fuel Policy, Californians for Affordable and Reliable Energy, Fueling California, and California Fuel Facts. So these are the different AstroTurf groups, and they probably added a few since then. And I mean, I've had friends send me stuff from the California Drivers Alliance and say, damn, what do you think? This sounds really good. Speaking up for the drivers. And it's funded by the Western States Petroleum Association. And we don't have any idea how much money they put in these groups, but it's an immense amount of money. It's probably at least equal to what they spend on lobbying.
Now, let's talk about some of the environmental organizations that most people know and trust are protecting the environment. Adam, you know that when we were fighting SB4, there were 4 of them that supported SB4, the Natural Resources Defense Council, the California League of Conservation Voters, Environmental Working Group, and Clean Water Action. And when questioned about why they support these things, their answer was to have a seat at the table so that they could shape the legislation. The week before, Governor Brown asked Fran Pavley to add these horrific amendments that would have led to unregulated fracking for the 2 years while the study was done. These organizations were unable to get her to either withdraw the amendments or withdraw the bill, and so they took their name off the bill at the last minute. So much for having a seat at the table.
Right now, there's a number of organizations that get money, not specifically from the oil industry, but from SoCal Gas, mostly in Southern California, because that's a Southern California company. And we know SoCal Gas was the ones that were that are responsible for the Aliso Canyon blowout, which was the worst natural gas disaster and the worst fossil fuel disaster, other than the Horizon, BP Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. And there's people that still say they're suffering the lingering health effects of this disaster. And what they've been doing in recent years, for at least several years, is contributing to nonprofit organizations. These include the California League of Conservation Voters, although I noticed they didn't get donations this year. There's also the Planning and Conservation League, which the SoCal Gas was a sponsor of their annual environmental conference. And they've also sponsored Earth Days for the Heal the Bay organization and for the LA Waterkeeper. Now, these groups do a lot of good things. They do, they do a lot of good activities, cleaning up beaches. They support clean energy, but it seems contradictory at the same time that they're environmental organizations to be getting donations from a big gas corporation.
Yeah, there's a writer that you and I both know, Corey Morningstar, who has a website called The Wrong Kind of Green. And she's talked a lot about the conflict of interest of many of these organizations that actually have people on their boards who have investments in oil and gas.
The head of the oil lobby, who I've already talked about, Western States Petroleum Association president, she sent out a tweet on their WISPA page that bragged about how the California energy industry was elevating the middle class and improving our quality of life. And they put a new website called poweringcalifornia.com. And guess who did that website? LA Times staff. They made that website for Occidental Petroleum, which is now called the California Resources Corporation, to make it sound nicer. So this shows you, this is just one example how media, particularly big media, cooperates with the oil industry.
Well, I want to let you know that has changed. They have new ownership now, this billionaire, and they've been doing amazing energy reporting. In fact, Sammy Roth just did an amazing article that I want to have him on the show to talk about. you can't always assume that the people who are supposed to be protecting workers and the people and the environment are actually doing that. I mean, right now, and I'm going to do another show about this, the IBEW Local 18 here in Los Angeles, which represents all the electrical workers who work for the DWP, are actually lobbying against our Green New Deal here in Los Angeles. They've been protesting outside of Garcetti's house. They were very upset that he decided to cancel the contract to fund the 3 dirty energy plants and go to clean energy instead. And Sammy Roth actually wrote an article about how, yes, they're going to do that, and they're going to shut down the Intermountain coal plant in Utah, but they're going to build in its site, in its place, a new natural gas plant. So that's going to be a big fight to see if we can do anything about that, because Garcetti's claiming that he's the green mayor, just like, Brown was portraying that he wanted his legacy to be climate change. But it's because of these jobs. I mean, this is what I loved about Sammy's article, is he just talked about how this coal plant revived this very poor community in Utah that wouldn't have had any jobs were it not for the coal plant. And they averaged about like 92,000 a year. So it's the same thing with DWP. They're actually lobbying against our Green New Deal, and they are putting money into the campaign of John Lee, who is the Republican running against Lorraine Lundquist in Council District 12. And Lorraine Lundquist is an environmental scientist. She ran just because of climate change. That's her number one issue. So this is what this union is doing. And we have to, when we talk about a just transition, we have to talk about how we can get good paying jobs in clean energy, because we know that solar energy installers are making probably $15 an hour, not $92,000 a year. Do you have anything you want to add on that one, Adam?
We have obviously very high inequality in this country, in this state. When you talk about San Francisco and LA, you have some of the richest in the world, and you have homelessness rising. People working 2 or 3 jobs. So as we transition away from fossil fuels in order to protect the planet, in order to perpetuate humanity, which in my opinion is worth doing, we need to figure out an employment plan, and the labor issues need to be worked out at the same time. It's very, very important in order to make this work. And it's not an excuse to not do it. We have to do it. It's part of the challenge. So IBEW is doing some good work on the solar side, but they seem reluctant. They don't want to give up the money train that's coming from the oil industry. But that's got to be that. We got to figure that out. And also we got to figure out more employment opportunities for communities who have been harmed by the pollution. So it's government's job to figure this out. It's our job as citizens, as voters, to demand this of our elected officials to figure it out. It's not easy, but this is exactly the crux of what a Green New Deal must mandate.
Well, before we talk about solutions, which is going to be my last question, I want to bring up one more thing that Dan has written about, and that is offshore oil drilling. I remember at the Santa Monica Dem Club summer picnic last year when Eleni Kounalakis was running for lieutenant governor. I tried to interview her, and the other candidates who were there had no trouble doing an interview with me. I even told her I'd tell her the questions in advance, which I normally don't do. But she was really suspicious and told me to write her communications director. So that when she got up and started speaking, and she was talking about how Trump is going to be drilling, we're not going to let Trump drill offshore in federal waters. I called out from the crowd, what about Jerry Brown drilling in state waters? And she actually said, oh, we have a heckler, which I thought was very amusing. So why don't you talk about the magnitude of the situation and the hypocrisy of some of these elected officials, how they pretend to be tough on Trump when actually we're doing more oil drilling in state waters offshore than in federal waters.
And this was Consumer Watchdog and Frack Tracker Alliance that unveiled this big scandal. And that's that while Jerry Brown was going to different climate conferences, and bragging about, how he was fighting Trump's offshore oil drilling plan. In reality, he was expanding offshore oil drilling in state waters off Ventura and Los Angeles counties between 2012 and 2016. And then a Frac Tracker did another report, and that indicated that Brown had under his control over 4 times the number of offshore oil wells in state waters, which are waters 3 miles and less from shore, than Trump had in federal waters, which are over 3 miles. So you had, the situation where Jerry Brown, who was the king of offshore drilling, was directing or diverting attention to Trump. And whereas Trump's offshore oil drilling plan is certainly problematic, but when you talk to the actual oil companies and look at what they are talking about, including the Western States Petroleum Association, they aren't, at least say they aren't, immediately planning to apply for new leases in federal waters. Of course, since Brown was already serving their needs in state waters, they were concentrating on that. And I find it something that the media was really reluctant to cover. There were some good articles, and actually there was one brave reporter from Sacramento Bee that reported on this like several months after I've reported on it extensively in a bunch of places, from Consumer Watch, from Counterpunch to Daily Cause. But it's something that we need to talk about, and legislators do not like to talk about.
Now, talking about solutions, Dan, you write about how on March 27th, a coalition of 120 groups asked Newsom to take certain actions. What were those actions? And don't you think they would have been more prudent to have him pledge to do those things when he was a candidate rather than after he got elected?
The first is to stop new oil drilling in California, since not to stop it completely, okay, but to stop new permits for oil and gas drilling in California. The second thing would be to establish a 2,500 foot health and safety zone like other states have around oil wells in regards to homes, child care centers, schools, and other facilities. This is like even Texas, okay? Texas has at least limited setbacks from oil and gas wells. Throughout the state, they require 250-foot setback for fracking sites. And in Dallas, the capital of oil drilling, they have 1,500 feet setbacks. Dallas, Texas is more progressive than the state of California on this oil industry regulation, at least this particular one. And then third one, do you remember that one, Adam?
I believe it's a plan to phase out all oil drilling in California.
So those are the 3 different demands, and they're very, very doable. But I really believe that Newsom, to this point, is continuing the drill baby drill policies of Jerry Brown, which was to increase onshore and offshore oil drilling rather than decrease it.
Now, Adam, there was a bill, I think it was 345, AB 345. It was Al Muratsuchi's bill to do just this, to have the 2,500 foot setbacks. And in talking about solutions, we found that it's been the young kids, the Sunrise Movement, the Extinction Rebellion that have really created a spectacle about the urgency of this, protesting, getting arrested. And I covered an Extinction Rebellion action at Universal City Walk where they scaled the globe. Dan, you wrote about how the Extinction Rebellion did some actions in Sacramento for this AB 345, Muratsuchi's bill. And
Right.
It did get past the first committee, the Environment Committee, but then it got stuck in appropriations and turned into a 2-year bill. Where do you think that pressure came from? You think it came from Newsom?
No. I mean, the reality is the Building Trades Union and IBEW are very closely allied with the oil industry, and they also give a lot of money to the Democratic Party and candidates who run as mainstream Democrats. And so it's not shocking to see a new partnership form between Western States Petroleum Association that Dan was describing earlier and the building trades. And,
yeah, it's called Common Ground.
Yeah, Common Ground, and they're featuring ads all over on the online and on television, saying how dare we put these people out of work. So this gets back to the bigger challenge of the Green New Deal. How do we provide employment as we transition to a clean energy economy? The power is not there yet. I'm all for protesting, I think, and the spectacle and generating this in the media. That's an important component. But ultimately, politics is about power. And until we're able to elect people who believe what we believe in a widespread way, I think that's the challenge for the movement. And I don't think we're there yet, but hopefully we'll get there soon.
All right. Well, it's very discouraging, all the stuff that we've talked about tonight. And I've been at this fight for a long time. You guys have been at it too. I mean, what do we want people to do that are watching this show? What should they do to try to help move this fight along, which seems so intractable as we talk about it?
I think one of the important things is doing what we're doing now, because most people don't, and most environmental activists don't know the power of the Western States Petroleum Association. Even the people that were in the protests at the Western States Petroleum Association weren't well versed on it. And it's important that we educate. That's the first thing, and that's the thing that I see the most lacking. I mean, Consumer Watchdog does these great reports. The Lung Association of California does some great reports. I do this, do my own investigations into oil industry regulatory capture, but we need to get the word out there as much as possible. And I think it's great that Consumer Watchdog got a lot of traction in the media on this latest report they did.
Thank you, Dan, and it's great to be on this show with Dan Bacher, who's been an independent journalist, unafraid of the powers that be, always willing to tell the truth. Thank you, Dan, for your work. You don't get enough credit for your work. And my message on this is that people, it's a challenge because we feel the urgency of the climate challenge. However, in my view, there aren't shortcuts to building power. If you look at the Republicans and how they took power after decades of Democratic control, they went to the school boards, and they're also very disciplined and strategic about their media training. We need to do the same thing. Progressives need to do the same thing and to be working within and independently of the Democratic Party, in my opinion, doing both at the same time. So my question when I give talks and have these conversations is, is your city council on your side? Is your city council doing the right thing? Who is your state assembly member? Who's your state senator? Start with that level, and your Congress member certainly. And our job as voters and citizens is to not be buddy-buddy with these people. A lot of these people are very charismatic and smooth at giving you access and making you feel great. Politics is not about being buddy-buddy with your elected officials. It's about demanding solutions of your elected officials and them fighting for you. And that's where a lot of people get thrown off, in my opinion. So when we have that type of understanding that it's a power-based relationship, not a buddy-buddy-based relationship, that is maybe the most important thing to breaking through.
All right. Well, thank you both for being on the show. I really enjoyed having you, and I echo what Adam said about your work, Dan. I've known you a long time, and this is the first time I've had the privilege of having you on my show. Adam, you're a repeat guest because you're just a wealth of information and a powerhouse activist. So thank you very much. And I want to tell the audience that just like these guys, we have to keep fighting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your work, Lauren.
Bye.